Today's Focus Report takes us to the plains and prairies of the American West. Over 70,000 Mustangs are now thought to roam free across a string of states there, and their numbers are increasing. Ranchers and farmers have long been calling on the government to do more to limit the population of wild horses, but federal laws state that they simply can't be culled. Authorities have begun rounding up and rehousing the Mustangs, but animal rights groups say that techniques used are often too cruel. Our team has more.
The vast landscapes of Nevada are home to one of the most iconic animals of the American West, the Mustang, wild horses, which have been roaming free for centuries. Campaigning for this to remain so is animal protection activist LEIGH.
Is that common to see some horses close to the road?
Well, around here anywhere, and so they'll cross this road all the time to get to that water source.
There are now roughly 70,000 Mustangs living in the wild, and according to the U.S. government, that's too many. In an attempt to regulate the Mustang populations, horses are being rounded up and trucked off to federal holding facilities.
1971, Congress passed an act to, stop hurting our horses, to humanely manage them on the range. But they were hitting them with helicopters, running them till they were exhausted, breaking their necks on panels. So I started coming out, taking pictures, and giving them to news media and the public. You'll see wild horses run through barbed wire, hot shot in the face, kicked in the head. I like to tell people to watch a movie like The Godfather about organized crime, switch out the pinstripes for cowboy hats, and that's what the livestock industry is out here. They control the politics.
In the other corner of the ring, a wide coalition of cowboys and ranchers. From Wyoming to Nevada, they're pushing for a more drastic downsizing of the Mustang population.
What do you say, kids?
This rancher has 1,400 cows.
Cool.
Ever since this ranch was founded back in 1932, it's tripled in size. Meanwhile, the wild horse population has been doubling every 4 years, the ingredients of a territorial war.
Right now in this valley, as we look at it, there's 200 head of horses there. And they're watering right there with my cows, and there's places that we've got troughs and pipelines completely destroyed.
Destruction of grazing lands, draining of water resources. According to the livestock industry, the cost inflicted by what they call Mustang overpopulation is high. They're now asking the government to let them kill 50,000.
I think the only way you're going to get that reduction economically and feasible is to allow the industry to trap and bait and remove a number of these horses and allow them to go into the food chain.
But the 1971 protection law strictly forbids the killing of wild horses. So as their fate is being decided, Mustangs are being sent to the state-managed facility. That's where many have been living in captivity for years.
So these are wild horses gathered from public lands, mostly in Nevada.
Jason works for the Bureau of Land Management. Every year, his office spends $45 million to sterilize horses and put them up for adoption, but without much success. They, too, are now recommending to euthanize captive horses.
That is one of the options that was included in the president's budget request. That's recognizing the reality that we have 45,000 animals that are in our holding facilities that are not adopted. And so that cost is really making it complicated for us to control the population growth on the range.
But the organized killing of wild horses might not go down too well with many Americans. For the time being, the Trump administration has been refusing this course of action. One alternative solution to avoid killing the Mustangs might come from former outlaws. Here, 15 inmates have been selected to tame the untamable.
Pat him on the neck with that stick. It's good to be happy with just a stab.
Noah is serving time in this detention center for cannabis possession. He has been training his Mustang for the past 2 months.
I didn't know I had the patience to do it, but we're doing this together. I'm pretty sure I'm the first one that touched him. It was cool, and you can tell because when other people come around, they kind of tend to not treat them the same as when they treat you. So we're kind of bonded, which is cool,
With the help of these inmates, 1,200 Mustangs have been adopted so far. But with only 3 other prisons offering similar programs statewide, their hard work is still a drop in the ocean.
We're doing everything we can to try to train as many horses as possible. But it's a big problem. There's, thousands of horses that need homes.
4 times a year, the prison opens its doors to the public for adoption sessions. On average, horses are sold $1,700. This might just be the price of freedom.
Well, to discuss this story a little further, I'm joined here on set by Henri Landes, the director of the Good Planet Foundation and a lecturer in environmental policy at Paris's Sciences Po University. Thank you very much for being with us. First of all, clearly killing the horses isn't a solution. Rounding them up and holding them has been heavily criticised. What could the solution be?
The solution would be, first of all, to realize why we need to round them up and treat them in unfair conditions. Unfortunately, we have to rethink a little bit intensive cattle raising and agriculture. That's for one. We can't just continue to say, well, if we destroy all this living wild species, eventually we'll be able to do whatever we want in terms of industry. That was what one of the people was saying in the video. But unfortunately, we can't have that thinking. Otherwise, eventually we won't have any more natural ecosystems to use to produce anything. So at some point, you got to say, when do we stop also doing things so intensely and industrially so that we don't have any more natural ecosystem, including the horses, wild horses, which is just one example. It's just what we see in the degradation of the ecosystem. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you saw this very interesting initiative of training horses thanks to getting inmates involved, and that's changing their lives for the good as well. Well, if everybody mobilizes and recognizes that we have an issue here that is symbolic of the United States' culture, of its freedom, of the Wild West, and we get people motivated to participate in with the horses that are remaining in these centers, to get them adopted and to give them a real life, then we probably could solve the problem. However, what's not a solution is deciding to, well, let's reduce the budget for this this program, which is what Donald Trump's proposed budget would do, by $10 million, and reducing the BLM's budget for this issue, by reducing the budget for the Department of Interior, on which it depends, and deciding to really forego any solutions that are humane, and training the horses and giving them a future. If you just decide to cut the budget, what's really behind that is, well, we're going to say you don't need to guarantee that they won't be sold for slaughter and for meat consumption, not in the United States necessarily, but for export. But that's what's behind that reduction in budgetary costs, is to say, well, let's just let them sell them and slaughter them, and so we can eat. So there's not many solutions that are being put on the table right now, and reducing the means and reducing the quick fix is not going to help here.
As you hinted on there, as well as being an environmental problem, this is also very much a political problem. The government, of course, has to abide by that 1971 horse protection law, as well as listen to the ranchers and the farmers. Yeah, well, the ranchers and the farmers have their say in this and are right to say that we have an unsustainable issue here. However, we should have a discussion about how do we make cattle raising more sustainable in its context of the surroundings, which are fundamental for cattle raising and agriculture in general. And that also means that consumers need to recognize, well, we can't necessarily put all this pressure on farmers to demand so much meat raised in these kinds of conditions, and we should have a program that decides to support the local farmers and support the local ecosystems. And obviously you need all of the chain of people involved in this, including consumers and the politicians, to make the decisions that are good for the long term. Unfortunately, we're in this battle that is kind of crystallizing here. We have short-term decisions that are taking over and a budgetary decision that is going against trying to deal with this in a sustainable way. So it's unfortunately not going to get any better in terms of relations between these different stakeholders. Is this, though, just an example of Donald Trump responding to his voters in that core Midwest agricultural sector? Yeah, it is. I mean, he's looking at this as a political opportunity to answer short-term stakes and short-term preoccupations of a stakeholder, which are cattle raisers, and speak to rural communities. What he's not getting is that that's only going to come back to haunt both him and the environment, including the people that work in it, if he doesn't decide to put a sustainable trajectory to the economy in that area. The economies that Donald Trump tried to talk to, the people working in them, coal, the primary sector, agriculture. He explained that we are going to,
take off all the regulations that hinder your activity. It's not the regulations that hinder the activity. What hinders the activity is the fact that they're unsustainable from an environmental and a social standpoint as well. The fact that we make it more and more intensive, the fewer and fewer jobs for more and more output at lower and lower cost. That is not a recipe for sustainability in any kind of standpoint, including economic. And so Donald Trump needs to recognize that and make the decision that goes beyond the next 3 years of his mandate and think about the future.
And very briefly, is there another country with a similar problem that could be used as a model for Trump?
Well, there are several countries that have more interesting policies for cohabitation between the population, cattle raisers, and large predators. Horses are not large predators, but they are large animals, and we have a similar situation here in terms of consequences and relations. In Eastern Europe, there are cattle raisers for sheep that realize that if their cattle is attacked by wolves, they have not done a good job as cattle raisers recognizing the threats and the conditions in which they should raise their cattle to be safe from the wolves. They also recognize that that's the natural circle of life as well. So there are several countries in Eastern Europe where they do a better job of making everybody understand that there is a balance to maintain, and it's not about just ravaging a countryside by making it more and more intensive in terms of industry.
Henri Landes from the Good Planet Foundation, thank you very much.
Thank you.